Das Radical.
Dievaf, read Dievaf. 50,000 tourists to visit Iceland this year alone. Record numbers of tourists. Read all about it. Read all about it. Read all about it. 2 million tourists expected to visit Iceland this year. Read all about it in Morgunblaðið. It seemed like only yesterday when everybody viewed tourism in a positive light. A source of opportunity for daring entrepreneurs and a great source of revenue for our economy. However, things can change very quickly in this island of ours. It seems almost as it was just yesterday where everybody in Iceland was very happy with the amount of tourists that were visiting Iceland. After all, in our humble small island state we were just so impressed that people from all over the world wanted to actually come and visit our humble island. But then, with ever-increasing amounts of foreign nationals flooding onto our roads and into our hotels and cities and whatnot, it became clear to many of us that at some point there would simply be too many. But, of course, how many exactly is too many? Well, that is something I don't think anybody can truly say for sure, but more and more people seem to agree that we have already reached that level, or at least will be reaching it very soon. Obviously it is very hard to generalize and say that everybody in Iceland is annoyed with the amount of tourists we get, but one needs to consider that until very recently you almost never heard anybody complain about there being too many tourists. Well, now you hear these complaints almost every day. Of course it depends a little bit on where exactly in Iceland you live, how affected you are daily by the amount of tourists that come to Iceland. You may live somewhere where not many tourists visit, so you don't notice this thing a whole lot. Or you may live somewhere in Iceland where you, say, drive around between two places a lot and you'll notice just how insane the traffic has become. That's just one example. The most common complaint associated with higher amount of tourists is usually related to road security. You see, Icelandic roads are not as bad as some people may claim them to be, but they are of course designed with a certain amount of yearly or a decades, whatever amount of cars driving them in a corresponding period. However, if you suddenly get thousands and thousands of more vehicles driving them every day, then of course they get worn down much quicker than they otherwise would have. And what would usually be just a normal turn or a normal crossroads is suddenly overburdened by the amount of vehicles that are trying to crisscross one another on a daily basis. So basically our road infrastructure is getting worn down much quicker than it ever would have, simply because nobody anticipated there being this many vehicles using said roads. And then there is Airbnb, loved by those who use it but hated by everyone else. Housing prices in the Reykjavik area were already insanely high, but Airbnb has made the situation grow even that much more out of proportion. There are currently so many houses and apartments being utilized by its owners to accommodate Airbnb guests that has greatly decreased the amounts of available apartments. Thus the ones who are available and for sale have exploded in pricing, so it's very hard for normal working people to get an apartment these days. And this is not a problem that is confined just to Reykjavik. Oh no, you see, Airbnb is now common throughout much of Iceland, and there has actually been one county where the Airbnb situation got so out of control, that is, there were simply no houses for sale or for rent anymore for, normal people who needed to live and work there, that the county administration actually banned the practice of Airbnb within its limits. Now, of course, Airbnb is not the only service that provides, well, this sort of accommodation, but it is just the most famous and the most widespread of these types of practices. So if you're a young family trying to get settled for the first time, or just a normal poorer or working class person trying to find a place of your own, then Airbnb is an absolute menace to your existence. Now you may also be asking yourselves that, well, surely all the money that you make of all these tourists who flock to Iceland, some of that can be used to fix your roads and build more apartments, right? Well, yes and no, but mainly not exactly. You see, very much of the income created through tourism does not go to the government. It goes through to large corporations who have some sort of tourist-leaning business venture going on. And the tax revenue that they pay simply isn't enough to, say, fix the roads or do all the other things. There is currently also a great outcry to increase expenditures in, for example, in the healthcare system, and also all across our social welfare programs, as well as law enforcement and many other state-run enterprises. So all the revenue being created through the tourism, at least with our current tax laws, simply isn't enough to tackle the problems that we're facing. And also you need to consider, say there's a country road in some county somewhere that is being worn down very quickly due to tourists driving it. Most of the money that these tourists spend will go to some companies or corporations, either locally or nationally, and so it takes a very long time for said tax revenue to make its way all the way to that particular road. This problem is especially noticeable in certain touristy areas, that is natural landmarks, where the practice of paying for admission has been put in place in order to get revenue directly to fix the, say, walking paths in the area, because simply the tourist companies, the bus companies or whatever that ferry tourists to these locations, they make money off the tourists, but nothing of that money goes directly to, well, this particular area to fix the walking paths or whatever. So basically the revenue that comes in from these tourists does not go to the areas where it is most needed to accommodate all these tourists, at least very indirectly. Another important fact to consider is just how expensive Iceland can be. I mean, flights these days to back and forth from Iceland are not that expensive anymore, but the cost of food, accommodation, fuel, etc. are through the roof. And the tourists that come here are getting more and more physically conservative, meaning that they try to spend as little money as possible for what they would have done, considering how much they would have spent several years ago. A few years ago, or maybe longer ago, I'm not sure, the most common group of tourists that visited Iceland were middle-class family folks from mostly Central Europe. Germans, Brits, Americans, they're not Europeans, but, you know, same touristy demographic. And, you know, French people, etc., etc. However, for a lot of people like this, you know, normal middle-class people, Iceland has become a little bit too expensive. So we're seeing a decline in these types of tourists coming. However, we're seeing a great increase in, well, for example, Chinese people who very often come in very large groups, meaning, and you know, they hired maybe one bus for the entire group, or you know, all stay together at one hotel, etc., etc., meaning that they per person spend less money, and thus also spend their money on fewer places and fewer companies. And another group of tourists that has also increased greatly in volume are like tourists, mainly Americans and Canadians, but also Europeans that come here and try to spend as little money as possible on, say, accommodation by, for example, borrowing one of these god-awful happy campers vans that have been very cheaply converted into, well, camping vans. And then they just, you know, don't even go to camping grounds, they just park them wherever they feel is convenient and sleep in them. I mean, it's not a terrible way of travel, I guess. I mean, if you like that sort of travel thing, go ahead. But you see, people like this don't spend that much money in Iceland, and therefore they bring not that much revenue to Iceland. So we need that much more of them in order to make as much money for the economy as possible. So basically, the high amounts of tourists that are actually coming here are not giving us the revenue that they once would have. So you need ever more of them in order to make up for your loss, which is also a big problem. And by the way, I'm not telling you if you want to come to Iceland that you have to spend this much money or have to buy all of the most expensive shit and go to the most expensive hotels or any of that. You as an individual are free to choose how you spend your time in Iceland in whichever manner you think is feasible. But I'm just trying to explain how the current trends that we are seeing are impacting the economy negatively. In the past few years, both private and state-sponsored investors have poured billions of kroners into tourist-related infrastructure. However, in recent months, these investors have started to get a bit anxious, seeing that the rate of growth of tourism in Iceland is declining, and also seeing how the tourists are less willing to spend as much money here as they used to. And this is especially bad for smaller, more localized businesses, especially those who are not located in the southwest of Iceland. The southwest is basically the tourist center of Iceland. Not that many tourists travel outside of the southwest, except to several key locations. So if you have a tourist-related business not in the southwest and not located close to, say, Vík, Akureyri, Ísafjörður or Mývatn, well, then things are currently looking pretty bleak. And let me tell you about the biggest twist of irony you have ever heard of. In a recent poll conducted among foreign visitors in Iceland, the #1 complaint that they had was that there were too many tourists in Iceland. Let that sink in for a while. Tourists are complaining that there are too many tourists. Let the irony of that sink in! People used to come to Iceland mainly because of the secluded isolation. You could walk around in nature freely and not being bothered by anyone. But yeah, good luck with that nowadays. There are still a lot of secluded places where nobody goes to, where you can be all by yourself and enjoy yourself. However, more and more of us Icelanders have decided to simply not tell about any of our favorite secluded places, if we know any, because we don't want them to become as tainted by mass tourism as some of the other places have become. Sorry, nothing personal, but you know, I need my space. So basically, one can no longer consider Iceland, or at least many places in Iceland, as those, you know, uncorrupted by mass tourism kind of places anymore. That's just not the reality of the situation. But the saddest twist of irony of all may be the fact that right now, as Icelanders and foreigners alike are starting to lose faith in Iceland as a tourist destination as a whole, we are currently in a situation, we, the people of Iceland, currently find ourselves in a situation where we need tourists more than ever. World fish prices, as well as world prices for aluminium, which are two of our greatest exports, are now at an all-time low, meaning our economy has never been as dependent on tourism as it is right now. In fact, I believe tourism recently eclipsed the fishing industry as our greatest source of national income. So basically, the Icelandic economy has dug itself a hole that we can't get out of. Thankfully, our current administration is doing everything in their power in trying to reduce our dependency on tourism and trying to fix the situation. You are, aren't you? That's what I thought. So yeah, this video was a bit less optimistic than most of the videos that we make here on this site, but we really wanted to get you to understand the full scope of the situation that Iceland finds itself in. Anyway, I am Johan Phoenix, thanks for watching.
Das Radikal.